A ripple of unease passed through the guests. Murmurs spread like wildfire. And then his voice boomed through the ballroom. "There he is!" A stunned silence fell over the room. Clint straightened instinctively, his calm demeanor masking the unease bubbling beneath the surface. Hargrove staggered forward, his blue eyes blazing with contempt, his gaze locked solely on Clint. "The golden boy," Capitan Robert sneered, "hiding out here like he's just one of us." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A few guests instinctively stepped back, whispering among themselves. Sandra's grip tightened around Clint's arm. Please share your views in comments section about this story, and subscribe my channel for more interesting stories. The Oceania Cruises was no ordinary cruise liner. It was a floating palace, designed for the elite who sought to escape the chaos of the world. The ship's pristine white hull sliced effortlessly through the calm Pacific waters, offering its passengers a taste of unparalleled luxury. Among them was Clint Eastwood, a man whose very name carried a legacy of power, controversy, and admiration. Standing on the upper deck, Clint leaned against the polished railing, letting the salty ocean breeze tousle his hair. At over 6 feet tall, with an unshakable composure, he was a man who preferred to observe rather than be observed. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, watching as the setting sun painted streaks of orange and pink across the sky, a masterpiece no artist could ever truly capture. Beside him stood Sandra, her auburn hair catching the fading sunlight like fire. She wasn't a name the tabloids would recognize, and that was intentional. Sandra was different. Unlike the women the media had linked him with in the past, she was brilliant, private, and deeply grounded. A woman who had no interest in fame or the power that came with Clint's name. She adjusted the scarf around her neck and shot him a teasing glance. "You're thinking too much," she said with a gentle nudge. Clint smirked, his gaze still fixed on the sea. "Just enjoying the moment." "No, you're trying to enjoy it," Sandra corrected, her voice warm but knowing. "Big difference." A soft chuckle escaped Clint's lips, carried away by the wind. She wasn't wrong. Even here, away from the spotlight, he couldn't fully let go. Years of public scrutiny had trained him to stay on guard, to always be aware of how one photo, one overheard comment, could ignite weeks of headlines. This cruise had been Sandra's idea, a rare opportunity to step away from the world and just be themselves. And, for a while, it had worked. They spent their days wandering the ship, indulging in gourmet meals, and losing themselves in the vastness of the ocean. At night, under a blanket of stars, they walked the decks in quiet solace, savoring a world that felt untouched by the chaos of their usual lives. But Clint wasn't the only one paying attention to his presence. One particular figure had caught his eye, Captain Robert. A towering man, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, Robert commanded authority with every step. His immaculate uniform and firm stride exuded discipline, but there was something off about him. Clint had noticed him watching, not just once, not casually, but frequently. That unsettling gaze lingered just a moment too long, as if the captain wasn't just observing, but evaluating. "Have you noticed him staring?" Clint asked. "Is Sandra able one afternoon as they lounged on the sun deck?" Sandra frowned and looked up from her book. "Who?" Clint subtly nodded toward the bridge, where Captain Robert stood, his arms crossed as he conversed with a crew member. Sandra followed Clint's gaze just as the captain turned his head. For the briefest second, their eyes met. The captain's expression was unreadable, but his attention lingered just long enough to send a chill through Sandra. "He's probably just curious," she said, trying to brush it off. "You're not exactly anonymous." Clint didn't respond. He had grown used to being watched, but this felt different. Not just like someone seeing him, but someone studying him. Later that evening, in the opulent garden bistro, Clint found himself once again under scrutiny. The restaurant, with its soft lighting, panoramic ocean views, and crisp white linens, was the definition of elegance. Yet even here, amidst the laughter and clinking of glasses, he could feel the captain's gaze on him. And then, as if to confirm Clint's unease, Captain Robert approached their table. "Enjoying your voyage, Mr. Eastwood?" the captain asked. His tone was polite but clipped, his eyes betraying something deeper. "Yes, thank you," Clint replied, keeping his voice calm and measured. The captain's gaze flicked to Sandra before settling back on Clint. "Good. Let me know if there's anything I can do to make your stay more memorable." And with that, he walked away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Sandra raised an eyebrow. That was odd. Clint simply shrugged. He wasn't about to let a single conversation ruin their evening, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the most dangerous storms weren't the ones brewing in the sky. They were the ones lurking beneath the surface. The morning sun bathed the Oceania cruises in a golden glow as it sailed smoothly across the open sea. The ship, a floating paradise, was alive with passengers enjoying their morning rituals. Some sipping freshly brewed coffee, others settling into lounge chairs to soak in the endless horizon. For Clint Eastwood and his Sandra Abel, breakfast at the Garden Bistro had become a cherished routine. The bistro, perched on the upper deck, offered a breathtaking view of the ocean, a quiet sanctuary where they could enjoy their meals without the weight of the outside world. Sandra took a slow sip of freshly squeezed orange juice, her gaze drifting across the tables. Families laughed over stacks of pancakes, an older gentleman flipped through a worn-out paperback, and waiters moved gracefully between guests. It was the kind of scene that belonged in a travel brochure, serene, elegant, untouched by the world's worries. She glanced at Clint and smirked. "You're smiling." Clint looked up from his plate, caught off guard. "Am I not allowed to?" "It's just rare," she teased, her tone affectionate. "Nice, though. You seem happy." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling as he let the moment wash over him. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "At least here, I'm just me." "See? I told you this trip would be good for you," Sandra said, popping a strawberry into her mouth with a playful wink. Clint chuckled, shaking his head. For the first time in a long while, he felt like a normal man. No flashing cameras, no staged interviews, just peace. But peace was a fragile thing. Across the deck, a group of children raced past, their laughter echoing in the morning air. Clint watched them with a faint smile, reminded of simpler times, before his name carried the weight of expectation and controversy. Yet, even in this tranquil moment, something felt off. A flicker of unease stirred in the back of his mind, like an itch he couldn't scratch. And then he saw him. Captain Robert. The man had passed their table earlier, acknowledging them with a curt nod, but his eyes lingered just a second too long. It wasn't curiosity, it was something else. Clint leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Do you think he's always like that?" Sandra followed his gaze to the bridge, where Robert stood in deep conversation with a crew member. "Who?" "The captain." Sandra studied the man for a moment, then shrugged. Maybe he's just old school. The kind of guy who's all about order and discipline. Clint exhaled through his nose. Maybe. But he wasn't convinced. As the day unfolded, the ship buzzed with life. The pool deck was alive with splashing and laughter as passengers lounged under the sun, frozen cocktails in hand. A live jazz band played softly near the bar, their music melting into the gentle hum of the ocean breeze. Clint and Sandra wandered through the ship, browsing the boutique shops, stopping to admire the endless expanse of water. At a jewelry store, Sandra found a delicate silver bracelet, and before she could protest, Clint purchased it for her. "Stop spoiling me," she chided, though her smile betrayed her delight. "It's not spoiling if you deserve it," he replied with a smirk. As evening approached, the ship prepared for its most anticipated event, a formal gala in the grand ballroom. Guests returned to their cabins, dressing in their finest attire, eager for a night of glamour and elegance. Clint chose a tailored navy suit, sharp and refined. Sandra wore an emerald green gown, flowing like liquid silk, a vision straight out of a Hollywood classic. The grand ballroom was a sight to behold. Towering crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm golden glow. Polished marble floors gleamed under the lights, while a string quartet played a soft, enchanting melody in the corner. Clint and Sandra entered arm in arm, their presence drawing subtle but noticeable attention. "You're turning heads," Sandra whispered, as they made their way to the dance floor. "So are you," Clint replied, spinning her gently as they moved to the rhythm of the music. For a brief, fleeting moment, the weight of the world disappeared. They laughed. They danced. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Clint allowed himself to let go. But not everyone shared their joy. From the balcony above, Captain Robert stood in silence, watching. His sharp features were shadowed in the dim light, his fingers drumming on the railing in slow, deliberate rhythm. His gaze was locked on Clint, not in admiration, not in respect, but in something much darker. A steward approached the captain, offering him a glass of champagne. Robert waved it away without a word, his eyes never leaving Clint Eastwood. And then, under his breath, he muttered, "They always think they're untouchable." Back on the dance floor, Clint felt it. A presence, a gaze burning into his back. He turned slightly, just enough to catch Robert's lingering stare from the balcony above. A chill crept up his spine. Something was wrong. He didn't know what yet, but the storm was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be the waves that threatened to sink them. The grand ballroom of the Oceania Cruises shimmered under the glow of chandeliers, casting golden reflections across the polished marble floors. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the elegant hum of conversation filled the space. Clint Eastwood stood near the dance floor, engaged in light conversation with a couple he and Sandra had met earlier in the voyage. Sandra, her emerald gown shimmering, caught more than a few admiring glances from nearby guests. Everything felt perfect, until the massive doors of the ballroom swung open with a force that sent a shiver through the room. The music stopped mid-note. Conversations ceased. A heavy silence blanketed the space. And then he appeared. Captain Robert. The imposing man stood in the doorway, his broad frame casting a long shadow. But he wasn't the polished, authoritative figure the passengers had seen before. His hat was missing. His uniform was wrinkled, slightly askew. His face was flushed, with anger, with alcohol, or both. In his right hand, he clutched a half-empty glass of whiskey, the liquid sloshing violently as he took a heavy step forward. A ripple of unease passed through the guests. Murmurs spread like wildfire. And then his voice boomed through the ballroom. "There he is." A stunned silence fell over the room. Clint straightened instinctively, his calm demeanor masking the unease bubbling beneath the surface. Robert staggered forward, his blue eyes blazing with contempt, his gaze locked solely on Clint. "The golden boy," Robert sneered, "hiding out here like he's just one of us." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A few guests instinctively stepped back, whispering among themselves. Sandra's grip tightened around Clint's arm. "What is he doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Clint didn't respond. He kept his gaze fixed on the captain, watching his every move. This wasn't just a drunken rant. This was personal. Robert stumbled forward, nearly knocking over a waiter's tray. His voice grew louder, his words slurring slightly. "You think you can just walk in here?" Robert spat. "Waltzing around like you own the place?" His expression twisted with raw contempt. "You don't belong here. Not you. Not your kind." The room fell into a stunned silence. Clint's jaw tightened. He had faced public confrontations before, but this was different. This wasn't a reporter ambushing him with a loaded question. This was rage. This was resentment. And, above all, this was dangerous. Clint took a measured breath. "Captain," he said evenly, his voice calm yet firm, "you've had a lot to drink. This isn't the time or place." Robert slammed his glass onto a nearby table, sending whiskey splashing across the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, it's the perfect time," he snarled. "You think I don't know who you are? I know exactly who you are. I've spent years watching people like you, entitled, arrogant, taking whatever you want without a second thought for the rest of us." Clint didn't flinch. His expression remained unreadable, though his chest tightened. "Look, I don't know what you think I've done," Clint said, his tone steady, "but I'm not going to stand here and let you insult me or the people in this room." A bitter laugh escaped Robert's lips. "Oh, the prince speaks. How noble." He took another step closer, his voice lowering into a near growl. "You don't belong here, Eastwood, and I'm not the only one who knows it." The ballroom was so silent, Clint could hear the faint hum of the ship's engines. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Tension rippled through the crowd like an electric current. A crew member near the entrance hesitated before cautiously stepping forward. "Captain, maybe it's best if we step outside," he said carefully. Robert snapped his glare to the crew member. "Don't tell me how to run my ship," he barked. His attention snapped back to Clint. "This isn't over, kid," he muttered under his breath. "Not by a long shot." Before things could spiral any further, two senior officers approached the captain. Their movements were calm but firm. "Sir, we need to speak with you." For a moment, it seemed like Robert might resist. But then, with a frustrated grunt, he pulled away, allowing the officers to escort him toward the exit. As he was led away, he cast one last glance at Clint. A gaze filled with resentment and something else. Something deeper. "You'll regret this," he muttered. And then he was gone. The ballroom remained in tense silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. The music resumed, but the festive atmosphere had vanished. Conversations were hushed. Uneasy glances were exchanged. Clint exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly, though the tension still clung to him. He turned to Sandra. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, but her expression was still tight with worry. "What was that?" she whispered. Clint stared at the doors where the captain had disappeared. "I don't know," he admitted, "but something tells me this isn't over." And he was right, because the real storm was only just beginning. The whispers didn't stop. Even after Captain H. Robert Argrove was escorted out of the grand ballroom, the tension aboard the Oceania cruises remained thick. Conversations were no longer filled with laughter and light-hearted exchanges. Instead, they were murmured speculations about what had just unfolded. Clint Eastwood and Sandra moved through the ship's corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "We should go," Sandra said softly, her voice tinged with unease. Clint nodded, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back as he guided her toward their suite. Heads turned as they passed, their presence now carrying an air of curiosity and caution. Once inside, Sandra immediately paced the room, her arms crossed, worry etched into every movement. "Clint, what just happened? Why would he come after you like that?" Clint exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall, his jaw clenched as he processed the encounter. "I don't know." But he did know one thing. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a drunken outburst. It was personal. "Maybe he's just unstable," Sandra suggested. "Or drunk. Either way, this doesn't feel safe." Clint ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "It's more than that. Did you hear what he said about my family? This isn't just some grudge. He believes something." Sandra frowned. "Do you think he believes one of those conspiracy theories? The ones they spread online about you and your family?" Clint's expression darkened. It wouldn't be the first time. He paused, staring at the ocean through the cabin window, his mind piecing things together. But this felt different. He wasn't just venting, he was certain, like he had a reason for hating me. Sandra's voice dropped to a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Clint turned to face her. "If I report him, this whole thing becomes a headline. Clint Eastwood confronts unhinged captain. It'll spiral out of control, and no one will care about what really happened." Sandra tilted her head, studying him. "So you're just going to do nothing?" "No," Clint said firmly. "But I need to figure out what he's holding on to. If this is about me or my family, I can't just ignore it." She stepped closer, her voice filled with concern. "You're not going to confront him, are you? That man is dangerous. You saw how he acted tonight." Clint's eyes met hers, filled with quiet resolve. "I'm not going to do anything reckless." But deep down, he knew. He couldn't let this go. The next morning, Clint was called to the ship's security office. 2 senior officers escorted him through the ship, their expressions unreadable. Inside the small, sterile room, a row of security monitors displayed live footage from different areas of the Elysian Voyager. The head of security, a man named Officer Perez, stood by the console. His face was grim. "We've uncovered additional information about Captain Robert," Perez began, his tone serious. "It appears he's been tracking your movements since the moment you boarded the ship." Clint's jaw tightened. "So, last night wasn't impulsive. He's been planning this." Perez nodded. "We also reviewed security footage from the hours leading up to the confrontation. Before he entered the ballroom, he spent time in his quarters, pacing, muttering to himself. He was clearly agitated." "Agitated about what?" Sandra asked, her voice tight with worry. Perez hesitated before answering. "We found something else. The captain has been corresponding with a journalist." Clint's expression darkened. "A journalist." Perez clicked on a monitor, displaying an email exchange retrieved from Robert's account. It looks like he was planning to leak fabricated information about you and your family, Perez explained. We believe he wanted to create a scandal while you were on board, something that would make headlines. Clint clenched his fists. This was about making a spectacle. It appears so, Perez said, but there's more. We believe this is personal. Perez pulled up another screen, revealing an old news article. The headline read, "Tragedy at Sea. Maritime disaster sparks new questions." Clint's chest tightened. He recognized the article. It was a hit piece that had resurfaced last week, falsely linking his family's name to a shipping company scandal from years ago. Perez's voice was grave. Captain Robert's brother was on that ship, Clint, one of the victims. A silence fell over the room. Sandra covered her mouth, her eyes widening. So this isn't just resentment, it's grief. Clint exhaled, his mind piecing everything together. I had nothing to do with that company. My father's business was separate, but that doesn't matter to him, does it? Perez shook his head. Number Robert has convinced himself that your family is responsible, and now he wants the world to believe it too. A voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the silence. Perez, we've got a situation. The captain is on the intercom. He's addressing the passengers. Perez's eyes widened, his fingers flying over the console as he switched to the ship's public announcement system. A sharp, bitter voice filled the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice echoed through the ship. You've all been enjoying a lovely cruise, haven't you? But how many of you know the truth about who you're sharing this voyage with? Gasps erupted in the security office. The privileged son of a corrupt dynasty, Robert sneered, walking among us as if he's one of us. Clint Eastwood and his family have taken everything from people like me, and they continue to get away with it. Perez quickly muted the broadcast. He's escalating, Perez said, his voice clipped. We need to stop this now. Sandra turned to Clint, her worry evident. You can't let him control the narrative. If you stay quiet, he'll twist this story until everyone believes it. Clint's expression hardened. You're right. I need to confront him. Perez hesitated. That could be risky. He's unstable. Clint stood tall, his resolve unwavering. I'm not afraid of him, but I won't let him turn this into a spectacle. This ends now. Perez sighed but nodded. We'll back you up, but be careful. This isn't just about you anymore. He's dragging the whole ship into his vendetta. Minutes later, Perez's team located Captain Robert in the ship's control room. Clint followed the officers through the narrow corridor, his mind racing. He didn't know exactly what he was about to face, but one thing was certain. This was the moment everything would come to a head. And when he walked through that door, nothing would ever be the same again.